Alright guys, in this video I'm going to go over 16 unique functions that your nose does for you that you probably did not know about. Let's get started. Number 1 is relaxation. When you breathe through your mouth, you're more likely to take these shallower, quicker breaths. And you're also more likely to not fill up your lungs with air. Instead, what people do is this upper chest breathing, where you only fill up the top half of your lungs with air, and the bottom half of your lungs never fills up with air. As a result, you start breathing a lot quicker than someone who would always breathe through their nose. And as a result, you're gonna activate your sympathetic nervous system, or your fight or flight response in your body, which is gonna stress you out. Because first of all, when you start breathing quicker, that'll activate your sympathetic nervous system. And also, when you only use the top half of your lungs, that's another signal to activate your sympathetic nervous system. Now, when you breathe through your nose holes are smaller, so there's more resistance to your breathing. As a result, this is gonna slow your breathing down, and it's gonna help regulate your breathing better, and it's gonna help keep you more relaxed. Number 2 is that it warms the air. So your nose has something called these turbinates, and these turbinates function by tempering the air. So as the air passes through these turbinates, it'll help warm the air up to your body temperature, and it'll make it more comfortable for your lungs. Number 3 is it humidifies the air. So just like how it warms the air, it also humidifies the air and makes it more comfortable for your lungs. This is because as the air starts passing through your nose, the water inside your nose starts evaporating, and it causes that air to become more moist. Now instead, when you breathe through your mouth, you're gonna have this cold, dry air that's gonna cause inflammation in your lungs. So your nose has these hairs that act like a filter, and they'll filter out different dust and particles. And also, it has this mucus. And this mucus will also kill 98 to 99% of viruses and bacteria before it enters your lungs. So that means you're way less likely to get sick when you breathe through your nose versus when you breathe through your mouth. Number 5 is it conserves water. I want you to try breathing out on some glass. First, try breathing out with your mouth, and then try it with your nose. See which one fogs that glass more. If you don't want to do it, it's going to be your mouth. Breathing through your mouth causes a lot more dehydration versus breathing through your nose, because when you exhale through your nose, then it's going to retain a lot of that moisture and a lot of that water. Number 6 is nitric oxide. So another cool feature of your nose is your paranasal sinuses. As air enters your nose, it also goes through these paranasal sinuses, and that in turn produces a molecule called nitric oxide. Now, nitric oxide does 2 cool things. First is it's a vasodilator, and the second is it's an antibacterial. So this nitric oxide will help the gas exchange in your lungs and make it more efficient, and it'll also prevent infections because it's an antibacterial. So that means things like tonsil and adenoid infections will be much less likely when you're a nose breather because you have all this nitric oxide there. Number 7 is it dilates your blood vessels. So we already talked about nitric oxide and how that's a vasodilator, but you also get more CO2 when you breathe through your nose. And the reason is when you breathe through your nose, you're gonna breathe slower because there's more resistance to air coming in and out. And when you breathe slower, it gives more time for your body to build up CO2 or carbon dioxide. Now, CO2 is also a vasodilator. So now having both this increased CO2 and this nitric oxide, you're going to be more likely to have lower blood pressure, improved health of your heart, and also better gas exchange. Number 8 is it dilates the nose. What? The nose dilates the nose? So the nose is something that can both constrict and produce more mucus when we don't need more oxygen, but it's also something that can dilate and get rid of that mucus when we need more oxygen. The way it does this is you have these breathing receptors in your brain. One of these breathing receptors determines whether you're breathing through your mouth or your nose. And the second determines how much volume of air is going in and out of your body. Now, these receptors are completely independent of each other. Now, if that second breathing receptor notices that the volume of air coming in and out of your body is too much, then it's going to constrict your nose. And it does this by, 1, constricting your nose, but also producing more mucus through something called these goblet cells. Now, this is really important for people who always have a blocked nose, because you can use this knowledge to help unblock your nose. So this study took a group of 51 people, and they had them either exercise or hold their breath for 30 seconds. And they found that both whether they exercised or whether they simply held their breath, that their nasal resistance went down. Or in other words, their noses opened up. And the reason is kind of going back to before. When you're holding your breath or when you're exercising, your body's producing more CO2. And when your brain senses that more CO2 is being produced, then your brain sends a signal to your nose to start opening up, because we need to get rid of the CO2 and let in more oxygen. Now, there's actually a little trick you can do to unblock your nose, and it involves holding your breath. So what you first do is a normal inhale and exhale out through your nose. And you do this exercise after your exhale. And then you hold your breath and you walk as many paces as you can until you have a medium to strong urge to breathe. Once you have that medium to strong urge to breathe, then you recover by breathing through your nose for 1 minute. And then after that minute's done, you repeat that exercise again for a total of 6 times. After you do this exercise 6 times, if you do it correctly, then your nose should have opened up. Now you want to focus on only using your nose to breathe from this point on, because if you start switching to breathing through your mouth again, then your nose is going to clog up again. Because again, when you're breathing through your mouth, you're going to be releasing a lot more of that carbon dioxide, and that volume of air going in and out of your body is going to be a lot higher. So then you're going to constrict that nose again, and you're going to produce a lot more mucus. If your nose has been blocked for a long time, then you're probably going to have to do this exercise multiple times, maybe a few times a day. And after a couple weeks, you should start to notice a big difference. Now, I actually go over this exercise a little more detail in a different video, so I'm putting a link to that in the description below, so make sure you check that out. Now, number 9 is it improves your deep sleep. Breathing through your nose is crucial if you want to improve your sleep. So this study took people who have moderate sleep apnea, and it checked the effects of using a nasal dilator and a nasal decongestant spray on their sleep apnea. So they had a control group that was given a placebo that didn't do anything, and they also had the treatment group that actually had the decongestant spray and the nasal dilator. They found that the group that they actually treated, they started breathing through their nose a lot more, and their sleep apnea went way down. They either cured their sleep apnea or they went from moderate to mild sleep apnea. And also, this was an observational study, and they found that you get more oxygen while breathing through your nose at night versus when you breathe through your mouth. And also, you're more likely to get more growth hormone. Now, this is partly because you're more likely to get that deep sleep because you get more of that oxygen, and you're not likely to have as much sleep apnea when you nose breathe. But in a nutshell, your nose improves your sleep. Now, number 10 is it improves oxygen uptake in the blood. When it comes to our oxygen uptake, or how much oxygen our body actually delivers to our cells, our nose is way more efficient than our mouth. This study even found that when people switched to continuously breathing through their nose, that their arterial pressure of their oxygen increased by about 10%. So simply breathing through your nose more will deliver way more oxygen to all of your cells. Number 11 is it prevents asthma. So asthma involves inflammation and narrowing of your airways. Now, studies show that when you improve your nasal breathing and you reduce the volume of air that you're actually breathing, that this can improve your asthma symptoms. So this study had people sleeping with dilated nostrils. And in doing so, it not only improved their nasal breathing, it also reduced their asthma symptoms. So a simple trick you can start doing is start wearing a nasal dilator strip when you're sleeping, especially if you have asthma. This can help you out. Now, number 12 is that it improves cognitive function. Calling someone who's not so smart a mouth breather has been an insult for a pretty long time. And it actually has some backing. So people who breathe through their nose more versus people who breathe through their mouth tend to have higher cognitive function and more energy. Now, this study took people who have chronic rhinosinusitis. Basically, their noses were blocked. And they also had a harder time focusing and concentrating. And they found that once they did surgery to improve their chronic rhinosinusitis, that their symptoms improved and they were able to focus and concentrate a lot better. Now, number 13 is it helps you sing. So people who are singers tend to have these prolonged periods of time where they're breathing through their mouth. Now, when you keep breathing through your mouth, you need more and more pressure to start that vibrating of those vocal cords. But when you breathe through your nose more, this can warm up and humidify the air, and this is going to make it less irritating to your vocal cords. This can also improve the quality of your voice and make it less likely you get a voice disorder. And it can also make it easier to sing in general because you require less effort to make those vocal cords vibrate and to produce those beautiful sounds. So if you're a singer, make sure you focus on nose breathing, both during the day and while you're sleeping. You can even try using a mouth tape to help make sure that you breathe through your nose while you're sleeping. My personal favorite is something called 3M micropore paper tape. It's literally just a surgical grade tape, and you can rip a piece off and tape it over your lips, and it's super cheap. Number 14 is your nose helps involve your diaphragm. Your diaphragm is your main breathing muscle, and it's this muscle that sits between your chest and your abdomen. We talked about how when you breathe through your mouth, you're only really using the upper half of your chest and the upper half of your lungs, and you're not really going to involve your diaphragm. Now, if you were to switch over to using your nose, then you're going to be way more likely to involve your diaphragm when you're breathing, because you're going to be using your lungs' whole capacity, and you're going to start filling up your entire lungs with air. Now, one of the cool functions of your diaphragm is it's a major driver of your lymph. So your lymphatic system is basically this drainage system throughout your body, and it's also really important for our immune system. But we want to make sure that we're regularly draining this lymphatic system. Otherwise, it can swell up in certain areas. For example, our tonsils and our adenoids. And again, a lot of people who are mouth breathers tend to have these tonsil and adenoid infections and to have these swollen tonsils and adenoids. When you start engaging your diaphragm, you're more likely to start draining that lymph and less likely to get those infections and swollen tonsils and adenoids. Number 15 is it helps develop the jaw. Now, this is more important for a child as their jaw is developing. But if someone grows up with their mouth always hanging open, then their face is going to grow in that direction. It's going to grow in a very elongated and narrow direction. Versus someone whose mouth is always closed and they're breathing through their nose, their tongue is most likely going to be resting against the roof of their mouth. Now, if that person has their posture like this at all times, then they're more likely to have a wider growing face and more likely to have straighter teeth and not have those crooked teeth. The reason is you have these stem cells in your jaw. And when you start utilizing these stem cells at an early age, then your jaw is going to grow accordingly. Like when your tongue is resting against the roof of your mouth, that's going to stimulate that roof of your mouth to grow wider and forward. And we even have studies showing this as well. So this study had 47 children assessed, and they were examining whether they were mouth breathers versus nose breathers. And they were also measuring their facial development. And what they found is children who grew up as mouth breathers were more likely to have that longer, skinnier face. Now, number 16, and the last thing on my list, is it improves your taste. Now, obviously we know that your nose is important for smelling. But did you know that it can also improve your taste? Now, just ask someone who had COVID back in the day and they lost their sense of smell. They couldn't really taste anything. The reason is your nose is so important for your taste. And the reason your nose is so important for taste is because it communicates with a part of the brain called the orbitofrontal cortex. Now, this part of your brain is responsible for taste. So the brain ends up processing these different signals of taste and smell together, and that's how you get that enhancement of that flavor, whatever you're eating. That's also why if your nose is impaired, food just doesn't taste as good. So there you have it, 16 crazy functions of your nose. You've probably heard of HIIT workouts before. These workouts where you go at a super high intensity and then you take a small break and then you recover and you do it again. A lot of people think that that's the only way to really get a true workout in. And if you're going for a light jog or a brisk walk throughout the park, then you're not really doing anything. But is doing